In case you guys don't notice, there are now 3 people here instead of 2, and unless you think Tiz got buffer and his skin got a little lighter, you'll realize that it's a different person, and this is Sean Mullin, purple belt at Silver Fox BJJ, competitor.
What's up, guys?
Yeah, man, and we're stoked to have you on, and for those of you guys who don't know, just to get into Sean's story a little bit more and like to kind of basically explain why you're here, we're good friends, so it's like we know this story, but I think our audience would find it interesting because it's like a more unorthodox story in martial arts. But Sean is actually legally blind, and he still manages to compete at a pretty high level at Silver Fox, which is one of the, I would say, the better Jiu Jitsu schools, like at least on the East Coast. I don't know.
It's definitely one of the most reputable schools, in the area.
For sure.
So has a lot of name value, definitely.
And for those who don't know, Erin Blanchfield, obviously, top
Erin
contender,
Blanchfield,
flyweight.
Yep. I see her there all the time. It's crazy.
That is crazy, but
I have to make sure not to be a fanboy.
honestly, that's been like an interesting part since we've started this
Honestly,
podcast.
I just don't say anything. If I just look at her, I'm like, oh, there's Erin Blanchfield. Not in a weird, I don't stare at her. I just see her. I'm like, damn, I want to talk to her, but you don't want to be that guy,
I get you.
So,
I mean, especially when she's training, it's not like you're just seeing her on the street.
Yeah, true.
But to get into your story a little bit more, so obviously, like I said, you do all this legally blind. So to give the audience an idea, just like exactly what you can see, could you kind of like explain what your vision is like?
Yeah, I mean, on paper, it's 2400 if you want to go like on paper. I mean, there's a lot of, there's so many things that can affect my vision, like lighting and contrast and stuff like that. But if you want to go like on paper, it's 2400, basically meaning like if something's 20 feet away from me, it looks like it's 400 feet away from me. That's why like 2020 is perfect vision. Like if you have like 2015 vision, that means it looks even close. Then you're getting into like crazy eyesight. Good in a good way. So basically, the higher the second number is, the worse it is. So that's on paper what it is, and it's also that's in my good eye, which is my left eye. My right eye is, I mean, it's hard to really even measure my right. I mean, I have vision in it, but it's hard to really put a number on it just because it's really just kind of like, there's really, it's not even like if someone holds their hand in front of my eye with like fingers up, I can't even, right in front of it, it wouldn't matter. I can't even see that, So it's basically blind, it's because I was born with glaucoma, which is basically, your eye is like mostly fluid that goes in and out of your eye at a certain rate, but with glaucoma, it doesn't go in and out of the eye. It builds up, creating pressure, and the pressure is what gives you damage to your eye and the nerves that connect your eye to your brain. So that's really the biggest problem is the nerve damage, because nowadays people are like, oh, well, can't they give you a bionic eye, this and that? But the real problem is like the nerves that are damaged. They can't really, not yet at least, they can't replace that. So.
And this is
it's crazy.
It's you and your brother too,
yeah,
right?
My twin brother. Yeah, he's completely blind. So obviously from glaucoma as well, and we were both born like this. So
that must have been like a crazy first,
crazy.
Like
yeah, I mean we were born, and within 5 days my mom wasn't even able to. Initially they could tell something was wrong, and then within 5 days. We were having surgeries, and my mom wasn't even able to see us really for very long after we were born, and because she always not always, but when it comes up, she'll it's like she doesn't really like to talk about it, obviously, but it's it was like a real newborn babies, and you're not even basically like separated from them, and then you have to send them into surgery by themselves, and so, that's kind of how it all started. And then I probably that was in, October 17th, 1993 was when I was born. So I had the surgery around then. And then I had my last surgery was May 31st, 2018. And that was when I had a corneal transplant on my right eye. And that was a pretty invasive one because, I mean, the cornea is the front layer of your eye. But my natural cornea was so damaged from all the surgeries I've had, and just my eye condition. It was like a cottage cheese, basically. Or like a cottage cheese, Swiss cheese with the holes in it.
Yeah.
God, cottage cheese, that's disgusting. I hate that stuff. But so they replaced. I actually have it's crazy, but it's just the truth. Some guy who died, who donated his organs, that's whose cornea I have now in my right eye since 2018. And I had like 20 something stitches because they're basically just putting a new cornea on the front of your eye. Obviously it's more in depth than that, and thank God I have the best doctors in New York, eye and ear, in New York City and Manhattan at Mount Sinai, and they've done all these doctors. Dr. Sidoti, that guy, I owe my freaking life to that guy. Dr. Paul Sidoti, he did all these surgeries on me, most of them. I mean, the cornea surgery was actually Dr. Anita Gupta, a female doctor, because she's a corneal specialist. But most of these surgeries, growing up, were mostly more related to my glaucoma. And a guy, Dr. Paul Sidoti, he did those. And I'm going to see him actually in a week. Not even this Friday, just for a checkup, thank God. And because, growing up with all these surgeries, and because I had probably about 15 to 20 surgeries probably, going from, like I said, when I was a few days old, and then all the way. I remember the last day of school in 4th grade, I had to miss the last day of school in 4th grade because just by chance I had a surgery that day. Damn. And that sucked because the second to last day, even everyone knows when you're a kid in school, the last like 2 weeks even of school, you have that vibe, especially in 4th grade,
Yeah, because where we're from, I know a lot of schools like around the country it ends in 5th grade, but in our town it ends.
Yeah,
in 4th,
and it's the last day of elementary school.
Going to middle school next. So that's crazy.
So like the second to last day of school, everyone's happy. You're basically, it's the last day of school on the second to last.
Yeah.
So everyone's excited. Oh, last day of school. But I remember thinking damn, this year, because obviously I had other previous years that never happened, so I knew all about the last day of school as a kid, and I was I remember being bummed out, especially that, plus just in general. I remember I used to be so nervous about surgeries as a little kid. Oh my God, I remember even in the first house I lived in, I still have a vivid memory of waking up knowing I had a surgery. I remember the night before being real nervous about it, and if it was in the first house I lived in, I couldn't have been any older than kindergarten.
Wow.
And I remember waking up in my bed the next morning, waking up naturally, and being wide awake right away. When you have something on you, when you're nervous or something, you'll wake up right away. You're not even oh, I'm not even tired. Even as a little kid, it was like that. And I remember waking up and laying in my bed and being oh, my mom didn't wake me up yet. Maybe the surgery got canceled or something. Obviously a wishful thinking, and obviously it didn't. But I still remember that, but growing up, always having these surgeries and going to the eye doctor, and it was never always some bad news, there was a time period where it was a lot of just negative, it was never really good going to the eye doctor. So now, and then after that surgery in 4th grade, things were pretty good for a while, and that was 2004, and then I had honestly a break from any surgeries probably to 2016. I had a retinal reattachment in the back of my eye, almost like Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
And then 2018 I had the corneal transplant, like I said. But to have all that time where it's stable, and then even now where things are stable, and I just go to the eye doctor now because it's the same place 30 years I've been going. So it's so weird. I go there now and it's still the same place as when I was a little kid,
That's incredible.
And,
shout out to them.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Shout out to New York Eye and Ear, like I said, in Mount Sinai in Lower Manhattan, and on East 14th Street.
So when you since you said there was that long gap where you didn't have any surgeries, so when you got into wrestling in school and stuff, you didn't have to have any surgeries like that?
No, luckily, no. During, it's kind of 4th grade is my last surgery, for a while at least, and then middle school is when I got into wrestling, and then all through high school my eyes were pretty stable, luckily. So luckily it didn't really affect wrestling, thank God.
So this has always been interesting to me when you talk about this, and it makes sense the more I think about it, but to someone who obviously doesn't understand what it's like to compete with the visual impairment, can you describe why you think grappling is something you really can do without your vision?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of sport growing up, I was any sports that most kids want to play, football, basketball, I don't know. I just because you had to potentially catch a ball, and there's things coming at you that weren't right in front of me, and like, you know, it's not as like hands on. I never really like, I was like, if someone wanted to, even now, like one of my biggest things I hate if people like want to throw something to me, even if it's something stupid. I'm like, I just don't want, like, I don't know, it's just like my instincts, you know. So sports like that, I was always like kind of afraid of in a way, because I didn't want to get hit in the face or something with the ball, and like it just, I don't know. And wrestling was just totally the opposite of that, you know. Like the person has to engage, you know. There's no like long distance, you know. If a guy's gonna be 20 feet away, he has no chance of taking you down or anything anyway. So it was that, plus honestly growing up, I don't know, you know, who knows if it was natural or just because I kind of knew as a young kid I was never into sports like football and baseball and stuff. So I don't know, I don't know if it's that or just naturally I wasn't into them.
The ball handlers.
Yeah, the ball
We can talk about that on your
the instincts. Yeah. My instincts knew to avoid these ball handlers. And so, you know, as a young kid, honestly, my first thing I fell into in terms of like sports, quote unquote, that I loved was pro wrestling. Actually, you know, I kind of always talk shit about it now, and back then it was a lot better too. It wasn't as corny, but it is still corny. Like if you go back and watch it now, like there's some, you know, legendary like guys from the old days of WWF and maybe the early WWE, but back then I loved WWF. You know what I mean? I was obsessed with it. I was always like kind of like how I am with MMA now, to be honest. And so you know, I knew wrestling wasn't like I knew I wasn't gonna like hit anyone with a chair or anything, but just the fact that it was like pro wrestling. And then like, oh, this is called wrestling. I'm like, that kind of like urged me to want to do it more. Plus, I had a twin brother, and we would like literally go to war every day in the house just fighting. So I kind of, you know, I was used to like roughhousing and whatnot. So.
And you said that was like really something that you kind of just decided yourself, right? Like your parents didn't even really.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, you know, I didn't really have like, you know, anyone pushing me in one direction or the other. It just kind of happened, you know. I just brought the paper home from school and I just went and signed up, and that was really it, you know. With all this stuff, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you know, no one really, even like Jiu Jitsu or all these things, like, no one's pushed me to do anything really. Like, I didn't really have like, you know, someone like kicking me in the ass every day, like, oh, gotta do this, gotta do that. That's why I'm happy I became like really disciplined and just on my own, really. Like, I don't know how, really. It was just, you know, it's kind of just by choice, and kind of like, you know, a lot of it is because, you know, it's like, me, even growing up, like going to the gym, let's say, like every day I want to go to the gym, okay, but when I can't drive, I had to like walk or ride a bike there. So it takes, you know, most people barely want to go if they have, even if they, you know, live right near it or they have a car. But like for me, it's like I want to go, but I also got to get there first, you know, so you really got to want to do it, you know, and just doing that year after year. And even until this day, I ride a bike everywhere, you know, or walk. It kind of gives you a good discipline, and it's just, I don't know, just the lifestyle I kind of have lived. It's honestly a blessing in disguise, I think. I don't know. I think like kind of everything happens for a reason, and I don't know. I think
I would imagine that wrestling would contribute a lot to the discipline,
yeah,
though, too.
Well,
that's like a sport,
100%.
weight cutting and
that's
all that.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was a perfect thing for me to get into. Looking back in hindsight, you know, is like wrestling, and wrestling will just give you different, like, you know, even if you're not like a friggin' Olympic champion or anything, if you just stick with it for a long enough time, it'll just give you a different like mentality and toughness and like what you're able to handle like physically. Like wrestlers really are like probably the toughest people on the earth, or some of them. And obviously you see that in MMA all the time, but it definitely laid the groundwork, you know, and I see the difference in it now with jiu-jitsu. Fast forward, even though that I had a huge gap in between the two by no choice of my own, it's just how it happened.
Yeah, if you want to get into that too, you definitely
I graduated high school in 2012, and I didn't start doing jiu-jitsu till the very end of 2019. So it was almost an 8-year gap where I wasn't doing any grappling. I was just a gym rat basically. I just lifting weights, and you know, thank God I stayed in good shape, you know, all those years, which
helps out now.
You know, it was just hot, you know. Yeah, obviously I had no clue about jiu-jitsu. That was just, you know, like I said, it's kind of just a lifestyle. Even if I wasn't doing jiu-jitsu or anything, I always loved working out, and again, probably it all started because of wrestling. Wrestling like set me off on the right foot, you know, and a lot of good. You just, you know, I started because of wrestling. You start thinking about diet, you know, lift, like all this stuff I've been doing since like a young age, you know, like these guys I meet now, like, you know, I'm 30 now, who are trying to get into lifting now and diet and this and that, and you know, it's never too late. I don't mean it like that, but in my head I'm thinking like I've been doing this since like, you know, 8th grade, you know, I was starting to count how many grams of protein I eat. And as I got older, it got better and better. Plus, I was more in control of what, you know, my food. And, you know, now obviously I live on my own. I buy all my own food. Like, it's about, you know, being into all that. But that's all because of wrestling, you know. My coach used to talk about diet, nutrition, and same thing, cutting weight. Like, these guys who are just jiu-jitsu guys who want to compete, they don't have a clue how to cut weight. And they think you're crazy. Like, I'll be like, oh, yeah, like, when I used to compete at 145, a few days before the match, I'd be like, you know, 152 or something. And they'd be like, oh, my God, yeah, you're going to lose all that weight? That's impossible. I'm like, that's like a light, like, I would do that in like one day, you know, in one session. I would just, you know, before I had access to a sauna, I would just go down and layer up, just like old school, like wrestling. That's how we do it in wrestling. You just in a hot ass room with layers on, and then you know, you practice and you sweat like crazy. And then you know, you weigh yourself, and sometimes you got to put your clothes back on and you go work out more to just sweat it out, you know? So I didn't have a hot room, but I'd put all the layers on in the weight room and just be on the elliptical for like an hour and a half probably, and then just lose weight like that. But either way, you know, I learned how to do all this because of wrestling. You know, if I didn't have wrestling, I would be clueless. You know, I wouldn't even know where to start, how to lose weight and what to eat, what not to eat. So, you know, it helps so much.
So, like, what led you to Silver Fox then?
I mean, honestly, it was a godsend, like I always say, because literally right across the street from where I used to live. Well, it was a highway, but it was, you know, Route 23. But either way, it's, you know, still, it was right across that street. But I didn't know it was like in the back of like a strip mall kind of thing. And, you know, it was kind of weird the timing it happened, because I was just like kind of, you know, I was kind of bored just going to the gym, and I wanted like something to get back into like competitively. You know, I love lifting weights and being fit and all that is great, but if I don't have like a reason, you know, like if I don't have anything to like kind of channel it towards, after a while you're just kind of like feel like you're just kind of like a hamster running in a freaking on the on whatever the hell that thing's called.
Yeah, I know what you're
So I'm like, I need something to like channel it towards, you know. So it was weird. I was riding my bike one day and I ran into this kid I knew from high school, and he's like, oh, I was talking to him about the UFC gym that had opened not that long, but this is like in 2019, you know?
Yeah.
And I go, oh yeah, I was thinking about going there just because they have a jiu-jitsu thing there. I'm like, maybe I could just train, you know, it's better than nothing basically. Just kind of something to do and just see what happens, you know? And he goes, oh, and I said to him, but, you know, again, back to, you know, what I was saying before, a lot of it is like, for me, location means everything, you know?
Yeah.
Like Khabib. So it's like, so I was like, you know, UFC gym is close to me. You know, I live in Butler. It's right in Riverdale. It's really close, but because it's on the highway and everything, I'm like, it'd be kind of, I don't know how I get there on my bike, you know? So my buddy, Tony, he goes, oh, there's a place right across the street from where you live, Jiu-Jitsu. He didn't even know the name of it, but he just somehow saw it or something one day, and he knew I lived in Butler Ridge. So I didn't know, I had no idea about it. So I went home and I kept Googling it, and the one in Saddlebrook kept coming up. I'm like, all right, well, this isn't helping me. Saddlebrook, that's even, you know, that's even farther than UFC gym.
Not getting there.
So finally, like, I just kept like typing in Butler Jiu-Jitsu. Like, I don't even know. I just kept like Googling like crazy, and I finally found it. And they had like a street view of it, like from the front. So I kind of recognized, I'm like, I think I know where it is. So like that week or something, because I walk past there literally every day, you know. So that week, I went over there one day when I was walking home from work or something, and I just went over to see if I could find it, and I saw it. It has, well, you know, you've been there, it has the big bright letters. And once I got close enough, it said Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm like, all right, well, that's made it pretty obvious for me, which was good. So I saw
and
the
you're
schedule.
Like, by the way, for people who don't know, like lifelong MMA fan though too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you weren't a casual. Like a lot of people were just like starting to watch jiu-jitsu.
Oh yeah, no.
What's the thing that they say in the Wolf of Wall Street? The one guy, he's like, the one dude thought that jiu-jitsu was in Israel. I was like,
oh God,
crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The things I've heard when you tell people about jiu-jitsu, and everyone loves to act like they know what it is. Like, oh yeah, because I'll say, oh, I do jiu-jitsu. You know what it is, you know, especially like people our age, or I mean, you guys are a little younger than me, but you know what I mean. Like,
well, people still ask me and Tiz, like, oh, is MMA boxing? I'm like, no, it's not the same thing.
But like people are like, oh yeah, jiu-jitsu, I know what it is. It's like karate. I'm like, oh God. I'm like, no. I'm like, just say you don't know what it is. It's all right.
They see the gi and they're like, Sean's doing some crazy shit.
Yeah, probably. They just kind of lump a lot of martial arts together, and karate has, you know, karate did a good job. They got like the monopoly on all the martial arts. Everyone just,
isn't that crazy?
Whatever karate did, I don't know if it was all the movies with like Bruce Lee and all these people, and freaking Jackie Chan and whatever, but They like really any martial art. If you don't know what it is, it's just like karate.
I
You know what
remember seeing like nonstop
It's
when
good,
I
though.
was younger.
Yeah.
Tiger Schulman's.
Oh my
Oh
God.
my god!
Always.
Yo, you're right. I forgot
Well,
about
there's a
those.
lot of guys now I see at jiu-jitsu competitions who train at a Tiger Showman's because they do like
Yeah,
there's,
because they have
there's
Muay
guys
Thai
in
and
UFC.
stuff. Yeah,
There's a couple
Jimmy
guys-
Rivera.
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
is Tiger Schulman. That's nuts.
Yeah, I actually did karate a little bit too before wrestling.
How was that?
I mean, it
Pretty
was
dope.
all right. Like I don't know. Like I said, I kind of was always into stuff like that. Like I said, from a young age, and my mom was friends with this lady in Pompton Lakes, and I knew her two sons, and they did karate. So I thought it was cool. So I remember I went to like one of the classes to try it out, and I thought it was like cool enough to, something that it was a step in the right direction. So I did that for like honestly a couple of years, but yeah, it was cool. But I was like, you never really, you learn how to move your body and some quote unquote self defense, but you never really. And I know we're kids. I'm not saying they should have let us like kill each other, but you never really like. There's no real functionality. You're kind of just going there. You might as well just be like exercising. You're kind of just going through the motions and doing the kicks and everything. And it's good for any little kid to move around and do anything. It was definitely. I don't regret doing it. But after a little while, not a little while. I mean, honestly, I did it for a couple of years, but I got kind of bored with it. And then I got into wrestling, and then it was like every martial art I got into, I liked better. It was like karate, then wrestling, which I obviously liked a lot more than karate, and now jiu-jitsu, which I like more than wrestling because I can still wrestle in jiu-jitsu. It's just now you have the aspect of submissions, which makes it so much more fun, and more, wrestling is great, but it's limited in positions because, anything off your back, the match is over, and you can't lock hands, can't do certain things. Jiu-jitsu's, has so many more potentials, a lot more potential for, crazier positions and stuff like that.
Can you like speak to kind of how like wrestling helped you with your jiu-jitsu and also ways that like wrestling might like hurt people who are doing jiu-jitsu because guillotine stuff
That's
like
funny
that?
you say that. Yeah, we talk about that all the time. I mean, wrestling as a whole, I think overall, anyone who wrestled, most of the time, it's going to help their jiu-jitsu, just because you're used to grappling, you can get takedowns, and wrestlers are usually pretty strong, like a lot of these, you see it in the MMA, a perfect fight. I mean, obviously it's at a higher level than just two guys at a normal jiu-jitsu club, but a perfect fight, like example, is when Diego Lopez fought Evelev.
Yeah.
And Evelev's obviously a better wrestler, strong, tough guy, freaking, he's not going to give up no matter what, and obviously you saw that in that fight. He was in some precarious situations, but, but at the end of the day, he's able to always stay on top. And just enough submission. I shouldn't say, enough. I mean, Diego Lopez is really good, but a lot, I'm saying like even on a regular basis, like if a guy has enough jiu-jitsu awareness to just kind of stay out of submissions, he can stay on top, wrestlers have good top pressure. Like guys who aren't even that heavy, who are good wrestlers, they can get on top of you and feel like they're like 250 and they're like 150, they're they're really good with that. Good cardio, and it's really the mentality, wrestlers, in wrestling, jiu-jitsu is, jiu-jitsu, I said when I first got into it, guys I met through jiu-jitsu, like, and the instructors, they're a lot nicer than most of the guys I met in wrestling, like wrestling is kind of like, it's just like a hard sport like that. And jiu-jitsu is too, and honestly, most of the, like Fox and them, like the high level instructors, they would fuck up my wrestling coaches, guaranteed. But it's just wrestling breeds that like mentality. Then it's just about, because jiu-jitsu, everyone's cool, it's fun, even like competition, they're just nicer. It's more spiritual, Wrestling's like, stop being a pussy and, keep working out and freaking, just win. It's about winning in wrestling, It's not really like, oh, we're here to, have fun and exercise and self-defense. Like wrestling's like,
I think it's
you
different.
suck, you gotta win, it's like,
it's different too because like when you're in like a school, whether it be high school or college, like there's a banner on the wall, like you want that next achievement, and like it means more than like the individual. Well, I think like jiu-jitsu, you can definitely, like if you really want to lock in and do that like you do, for example, you can really get that personal attention, and like they want to make you better. It's not about like trying to basically prove that you're not a pussy, like you said.
No, it's no, they can tell, the instructors, they could tell, and they could tell from Fox could tell from when I first started. I mean, the first day I ever had a class with Fox, he tried to basically make me quit in a way or see how tough I was, because I mean half of it it was because I was, here I am friggin' first day, second day maybe of training, first day in the gi ever. So, alls I know is just whatever wrestling I have and just basic knowledge of like, all right, like I know I want to pass this guy's guard, but I don't really know how to, besides like a very ugly, like, as they would call it, like a bullfighter pass where you like just throw the knees to the side. But there's obviously even a technical way to do that.
As someone who doesn't train jiu-jitsu, I will say that's my go-to method.
Yeah,
on the ground.
It's a good guard pass, but I didn't really know how to really, so I'm just going crazy, going too hard. Looking back now, I'm like, oh my God, I always looked like such an idiot. So Fox literally like stopped the class like after like 2 rounds into rolling, and he didn't really like single me out, but I could kind of tell he was talking about me. He's like, guys, you gotta go lighter. This isn't what jiu-jitsu is about, this and that, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And, and he's right, and it wasn't even like I didn't think he was right then. I just, honestly, I guess you're kind of just going off instinct, and you don't want to get like, made a fool of, like rolling. So you're like, oh shit, like I'm just going to make up for my lack of technique with like, just go hard and, like knowing I'm probably stronger than a lot of these guys, But anyway, so he does that. So like me, I didn't change anything. Next round, I just keep doing the same thing. So finally, after that round, I guess Fox had seen enough. So he said, all right, Sean, last round, you got to go with Enrique, who is like the top level. He's a high level black belt competitor who is Fox's like right hand man.
Yeah.
So Enrique brings me over to the other side of the mat where it was like no one, there was literally no one there. So we had the whole other side of the gym there, the other side of Butler.
Yeah. So for like those who don't know, like when you walk into the Butler location, like there's like a little area in front of like where the desk in the locker room is, and then to the right there's like a huge mat, and then there's the one on the left. So like you saying
he took me to the one to the left.
Oh, okay, yeah. So like the one on the left, like it really is. Like and you've seen it. It's kind of like just like. It's almost like a dungeon, like in jiu-jitsu. I barely see people over there.
We don't use it that much, but we used it that day, and oh my God. You could tell, and this is me, like I said, literally second day of jiu-jitsu, but I could just tell he was trying to like, because I knew, I'm like, this guy could have submitted me 10 times over by now. He was literally like, I don't even remember how we started. First of all, I'm gassed already. My cardio, I'd been lifting weights, I rode my bike, but anyone who trains jiu-jitsu or wrestling, it doesn't matter. You could be a marathon runner. If you're not used to doing that, I hadn't gone live like that since, 2012, and this is 2019. So I was already gassed as it was. I was done. Then to have to go with Enrique, I don't even remember how we started on the feed or whatever. It doesn't even matter. But all I remember is soon into the match, he had me flat on my back, and he was just going knee on belly, which is like, basically like you're in side control, but instead of like taking side control, you just put your near side knee in the guy's belly and like kind of put your hands on his chest, You kind of usually do it to like secure it and then maybe move on to side control,
Gotcha.
But you can also, especially in the gi, when you can grab the collar, you can really be a dick if you want with knee on belly. Because in no gi, you could just grab the guy's back of his head and just, as you're driving, let's say my right knee into his stomach, I'm pulling up on his head, So he was basically doing that to me, but with the gi. So he's just pulling me, just driving knee on belly and I'm just like trying to move. Because like I said, I was already gassed. And when you're on your back, tired, this freaking dude's on top of you and you can barely get him off you. Like you start getting, especially when you're not used to that. And in the gi, you start getting claustrophobic, and like a panic attack.
And you wrestled too, so like in wrestling, when you're on your back like that, it's over. Like you just got pinned. So like wrestlers, I feel like if they like and you could obviously speak to this, like when wrestlers first get into jiu-jitsu, I bet that's like a weird feeling to be on your back 100%. For more than like a couple seconds.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah, I was gonna get to that because so basically he just held me there, and luckily I didn't quit or anything. I was trying to get out the whole time, but I could tell he was literally just staying there. Like I'm like, this guy could have taken my back, done anything by now. I honestly was hoping he would just submit me so I could at least just tap, and then like at least I'd have a few seconds to breathe before we reset. In a way, like I still would have fought it, but. It would have almost been a relief. But anyway, I survived that day. And then the next day I came back. And when I walked in, him and Fox were sitting there. And they kind of had like a little smirk on their face as I was walking in. They're like, oh, you came back. And I was like, oh, yeah. I'm like, I don't even remember how I worded it. I wasn't trying to sound like a tough guy. But basically I told them like, I've always come back. You know what I mean? I'm not like one of those guys. And they could tell. And then after, they weren't like, Fox got over it. He could see. I think I kind of proved myself a little bit with that, and then he saw me as time went on, Fox, he loves me, Fox, and I love him, I owe the guy a lot, and, but like you were saying, not to answer the other part of your question, things I've seen that hurt wrestlers, and I've experienced, especially early on, was like you said, being on your back is a big thing for even. I mean, you see guys in MMA, like even like DC, and like literally in fights will be like, oh no, like he'll be like, oh, a wrestler, he's doing a stand up, like when Michael Chandler like was trying to like when he fought Oliveira. That was like the one time. That was like the one time I guess DC actually said like not to give your back up. But like usually in fights, if you watch, he'll like basically just say like, yeah, give your back up and just stand up, like. Because he even says he hates being on his back.
I remember DC
guys like him, like
he said that he
crazy.
Can't even sleep on his back.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think.
I know
about.
it's crazy, but there's definitely, some truth to that. When you're kind of like programmed. Obviously, a guy like him has been really deeply programmed to not be on his back. But even just a guy who wrestled for long enough, anytime you're in like a grappling scenario, you kind of go back to that. At least in the beginning of jiu-jitsu. So I had to get real comfortable with that and. Just relax more and just really train. Like honestly, for the longest time when I was a white belt, I pulled guard for like a really long time, just to get comfortable working off the bottom and just to build guard retention and sweeps and whatnot, and wrestle ups. I mean, and I still to this day, I still pull guard. I should probably do it more, but I just focused on wrestling for like once I started getting into competing, I'm like, all right, I gotta like. Just like wrestle a lot more in training and get my wrestling up. So I've kind of been on like that trend for a while, but I still definitely pull guard. But another thing is like for wrestlers is when you shoot, I kind of had to like in high school wrestling, I used to love shooting like high crotches or fireman's carries, which are all shots through a head or on the outside. And then in jiu-jitsu, I learned pretty early on, I could get, not that it happened every time, but you'll learn pretty quick against a high-level guy like Enrique or something. You shoot any type of shot like that, head on the outside, you end up getting guillotined or even like fireman's carry. I would hit Enrique with the fireman's carry, and just based on how our bodies were positioned, instead of guillotining me, like I would get him down, but he'd like push my head down and like put me in a inverted triangle basically. So like he's obviously a top level competitor, but the guillotine is obviously the prevalent one. That's happened to me a lot early on, so I adjusted my wrestling style a lot differently for more functional type wrestling and jiu-jitsu type wrestling. But there's still obviously the more you get comfortable with it, you get a stronger neck, you get comfortable being choked too, and you get more confident in your ability to get out of guillotines. I mean, I have been shooting a little more like head on the outside singles and stuff like that recently, but still, it's definitely something to be wary of. And another thing that wrestlers, I mean, a lot of guys I know who don't even do jiu-jitsu who would be good, probably even better than me, but they just have like their ego. Like wrestlers, especially guys who are good and they wrestled their whole life, they're used to being like top dog, and they don't want to like go into something where they're maybe, and even then, they definitely wouldn't be like the lowest guy on the totem pole, but it's like they don't want to put their ego aside. Plus, honestly, it's kind of funny, like some guys in wrestling, they're tough, and wrestling's so tough, like the work ethic, like I was just saying, and just like the grinding, but like in wrestling, one thing I will say about jiu-jitsu is you get more like physically like kind of beat up, because guys are trying to choke you and freaking grabbing you're kind of more like, it feels more kind of like a fight, like a wrestling match is arguably harder, like cardio, and because you're forced to wrestle and whatnot. Not that, I mean, jiu-jitsu it depends on the match, but yeah, arguably a wrestling match probably would be a little harder than a jiu-jitsu in terms of cardio. But in terms of like physicality and like people pulling on, I mean, people don't realize who never trained you. This is how I got these crazy cauliflower ears. Like freaking, this isn't even just, people see this all the time, like, oh, you wrestle, which is definitely from wrestling, but jiu-jitsu gave me the cauliflower ears worse than ever, because most of it isn't even from wrestling and like going ear to ear with someone. It's from pulling my head out of like triangles and guillotines, because it's like freaking a pizza roller on either side of your head as you're pulling your head out. Yeah. And just stuff like that. So it's a lot more physical, and guys are trying to, with leg lock. I know guys who are stud wrestlers. I know a guy I train with. He's a stud freaking college wrestler. He's freaking way better than me. He's a brown belt. I mean, this kid's an animal. And he only trains in the gi. And I'm like, and he competes and stuff, but only in the gi. And I'm like, I respect, I'm not trying to like knock him like he shouldn't do the gi, but I'm like, you gotta, and he doesn't really train no gi really at all. And I'm like, you're a high level college wrestler, really good jujitsu too, real smart guy, I'm like, you would kill no gi, but he doesn't want to do it because he's like afraid of his legs getting like leg locks and stuff. And I know a couple guys like that, like similar, like high level guys, college wrestlers, but they're like, they don't want to like deal with leg locks, and it's just crazy to me in my head because I'm like, oh, these guys would just be so good, Wait, they'd be better than me, I'm just being honest, like, and you hear guys talk about that, like Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin. They're like, listen, not that I'm not comparing myself to them, but it's funny to even hear guys like that say it, like, and at gyms like where they go, they're like, we have guys who are better than us, they just don't compete, you know what I mean? And I know guys like that, and it's just funny sometimes the reasoning behind it. It's surprising,
So like, when you do compete, and like to kind of get back to this too, because I feel like people, when you're like, because when you're talking about it, obviously like it's your reality every single day in and out of jiu-jitsu that like you can't see as well as like the average person. But like when you're in competition, I know you've said that like obviously you have to engage. You've said that like the hardest part is kind of when you're at the beginning and you haven't really like started wrestling. You have to get a hold of the guy, right?
Oh yeah.
And so like, do they? I mean, obviously, like you can look at your eyes and kind of like see that it's a little different, but like, do they know that you have vision problems, or like, do they kind of like figure that out after, or do they not even know at all?
I mean, yeah, honestly, in wrestling, it's with the school and everyone, like since wrestling, plus I started at a young age. I used to start actually start in contact in wrestling where we'd start like one hand up, one hand down like this, and then the match would start, and then and then if we like broke away, or if he like backed up and we're like, oh my bad, if we're like apart, the ref would stop the match and then we'd restart. But honestly, sometimes it would get kind of annoying, even for me, and I would get it. Like there'd be times I have matches, and it's wrestling, the guy's trying to work, whatever, and if we break contact even like a little bit, he was still like pretty close in front of me, but like we're hand fighting, whatever. Sometimes they'd like stop the match or restart, and I'm like, it would kind of lead to like like a choppy match, like stop, restart and go, start and go. And I remember even having matches right here, like dads in the crowd being like, come on, like freaking they keep restarting the match. But so one, I learned a lot of stuff. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling was like a trial run. I learned so much, like what to do, what not to do. So going into jiu-jitsu, I had like, at least in my head, for me, I had like some things I like knew not to do, and like I'm like, all right, this is almost like a retake, I had like a redo, because I had a lot of time to think about, for a long time, I cared about wrestling. As I got a little older, I missed it, and I realized like, wow, I wish I had something else to channel something like that into, and like right the wrong, because I had a lot of things like that, when you're a competitive guy, especially something with wrestling, because it's like one-on-one, it's not like I lost some basketball game or something. I could get over that, but it's like, your ego, I'm just being honest, your ego, and there's still, and even to this day, I kind of got over it because of jiu-jitsu, but like before jiu-jitsu, I had all these things in wrestling, like, oh, I should have done this more, I should have been more serious with it, I should have, like, this was, like, my mentality was wrong, I should think like this, I had all these, like, things I wanted to do better, but I didn't have anything to prove, I just needed that outlet,
Right.
So I finally had jiu-jitsu, so I'm like, oh, this is like my chance. It was like God gave me this freaking second chance, because these things were like really on my brain, like for years after I got out of high school, like kind of like regrets, like, oh, I should have done this or should have done that, or matches that I had that I should have won that I lost, like, oh my God, freaking, there's still some match in high school I could still, I always remember, of course, ones I lost, I don't care, even with jiu-jitsu, I don't even think about the matches I win, really. It's only the ones you lose. You win a match, it feels great, but it's like short-lived. You lose a match, oh man, you'll freaking think about it for years, Even now, I'm 30 years old, but jiu-jitsu, and this is another thing jiu-jitsu did for me, it literally like put all that stuff to rest, honestly, because like through jiu-jitsu, it was like I had something to prove to myself, and even now, and I'm still going to keep doing it. But even for what I've already done in jiu-jitsu, and like I've proven to myself like a lot of things that I wanted to do that were in my head because of wrestling, and so that was the biggest thing. But in terms of back to the contact, one of those things being, sorry, I went on a little tangent.
No,
there.
yeah, you're good.
One of those things being though was I'm like, I'm not even gonna bother with this contact and all this shit because it was just a pain. I'm like, what, I'd rather have it be like that because it's more functional anyway. I'm like, even if we break contact for a little bit, like the guy's not going to run too far away. Like, it's not like we're in like a crowded, there's like a million people. It's just me and him on the mat.
I know we've talked about this too, like in MMA and stuff. Like we'll talk about like, oh, well, if you're in like a street fight, like there's not going to be a ref to put, like, you know what I'm saying? Like put you.
Yeah, I always had that. Yeah, I went into
jiu-jitsu.
Jiu
Have like
Jitsu.
that mindset.
Yeah, I have that mindset. Like I never used to think like that when I was in wrestling, but when I got into Jiu Jitsu, just being older and probably because after watching even more MMA and thinking about it, I and even now I still train like functional, that's, even though I compete and this and that, and you want to have a well-rounded game, like honestly, like if I'm on bottom, unless I'm really trying to work like arm bars or stuff like that, like honestly, most of my bottom is like just sweeps or wrestle ups or just getting back to your feet as quick as you can, like MMA style, basically not hanging out on the bottom, because obviously I'm not an MMA fighter and I never will be, but in terms of like a street fight, you don't want to be hanging out in your closed guard trying to armbar the guy or something. Even a guy who doesn't have much training, he hits you in the face a few times, you're going to be like, like Fox says, every time you get hit, you lose a belt level of your jiu-jitsu. So after like 2 shots, I'll be a white belt again. And then after that, you'll be a freaking, I don't know, what a negative freaking guy who never even stepped a foot in the gym. So, it's definitely, that was kind of, that's definitely my approach. And wrestling's a big part of that. Obviously, again, you see it in MMA all the time, Basically, training for street fight and MMA is pretty similar, Obviously, there are differences, obviously, but overall, it's a similar type game where, if you can get a takedown and get on top of the guy, you have a pretty good chance of winning. So, that and, but yeah, I mean, with the contact with jiu-jitsu, I mean, it can, if someone's like off to my right side, obviously I'm a little more susceptible to like a takedown maybe because, I might not see it as good because my right eye, like I can't see out of it, let alone like the peripheral vision. Forget about it.
Let's hope your future opponents aren't watching
yeah,
this.
Right. I know. But it's funny you say that because one of my matches, I guess it was the end of the summer. It was the day before Labor Day, actually. It was the Sunday of Labor Day weekend at the one tournament in Rahway. And the one guy I went against in the finals, I guess he could tell maybe based on just looking at my eyes or just seeing how I was moving or looking at him or whatever, like him or his coaches could tell like something was up with my eyes. So because during the match his coaches were like telling him like, oh, stay to his right side and all this stuff, and the guy was kind of like fucking with me, like putting his hand out and like kind of almost being like, oh, can you see this, you know what I mean? And my coach was getting pissed. So I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, oh, don't worry, I'm like, once I get this guy, like once I get my hands on him, like, and get him down, I'm going to freaking kill this guy. And my coach, so when I finally I took him down, and when I finally got on top of my coach was freaking screaming, he's like, Sean, you do not let him up now. Like, he was going crazy. And I was too in my head, I'm like, yeah, I wanted to kill the guy too, and luckily I ended up winning that match. I couldn't lose that one, so.
Submission or
it's
decision?
Funny. No, it was a decision. I mean, he was a pretty tough guy, but yeah, no, either way, I think it was like 8-0 or something, so it wasn't like a close match like that. But yeah, it was definitely a good moment. But yeah, no, I mean, I actually that happened another time too. Actually, like twice, both times that's happened, I've won the matches. So thank God.
And like when people do that type of like stuff to you, kind of like to, I guess, mind games in a way, but also in a way like it is.
It's kind of a strategy. Advantage. I mean, I can't really blame.
That's what I'm saying.
They're
like,
just kind of assholes about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I get this. I mean, listen, it'd be like if you go against a guy with like one leg or something, and he's playing guard. Of course, I'm gonna try to pass to that side. Like
no double leg takedowns though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right. But I don't blame him. It's just it's just kind of one, they're kind of assholes about it, and two, it's like, even if that is the case, you kind of want to prove to them that, like, even though that is the case, it's not going to matter. You know what I mean?
You've talked about this, though, too, like, and you've obviously won medals in the grappling industries, the Naga one I remember you were showing us. Like,
yeah.
I feel like a lot of the people who you compete against, and even the people in your at Silver Fox who you train with, like, they all have, like, a lot of respect for, like, what you do. And I know the people who train with you obviously have a different understanding because they obviously know about you and they know that you have the visual like disadvantage, but like, do you get like a lot of like respect at the competitions and stuff from,
it's
like,
funny after doing all these competitions, and a lot of guys, these grapplers, you know, a lot of these competitions, even if they're kind of far from where I live, they're all in this kind of area, you know, like tri-state area.
Right.
So a lot of after doing enough of them, you do start to see some of the same guys, even for other guys from other gyms. I still don't even know their names, but you just, hey, what's up? You know, you just bullshit, and you know, they know, and like guys have come up to me after tournaments who I have no clue who they are, and they just, I guess, saw me throughout the day, and they'll come up and be like, hey man, you look good, you know, like it's you know, it's real inspirational and all this stuff, you know, so. You can kind of tell people pick up on it, obviously, which is fine. You know, I appreciate all the, you know, all the compliments and people say, you know, inspiration, this and that, which, you know, I get it. It is really nice to hear. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm real, like, one, I'm humble, and two, I'm always like, you know, like, I get it, but there's so many people who have way worse things to deal with, you know, than me. Not to, like, you know, downplay everything, but you know, there's kids who are like born with cancer and freaking wheelchairs and stuff like that. I'm like, those are the people who really deserve, and those people, I'm lucky I can do. I mean, I pretty much can, you know, I've lived a pretty normal life, thank God. You know, like some people are just, even if my life, like I had to, you know, maybe work a little harder and certain things were obviously harder to do, but at least it was manageable. Like if you're like freaking paralyzed or you have some crazy disease, like no matter what your mindset is, like there's certain things you just won't be able to do, you know, unfortunately. And so luckily for me, you know, I appreciate it, you know, when people, you know, like I was saying, they recognize you, they say all these nice things, but it's, there's, you know, it could always be worse, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. And obviously,
crazy.
Me and Tiz have known you for like a really long time. And so like, we know that like, you know that it's just your reality and like this is just how you live life. And like you said, like you don't,
I don't think about it really.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not like I wake up every day and, you know, I wake up and the first thing I think is like, oh, I'm legally blind. Like it's
right. Know, like you just get used to it.
Yeah, it is. So. I don't even think about it really. It is what it is. And like I said, honestly, in hindsight now, and I kind of wish. I mean, I wish, but I don't, because you know, I think it's just how it was meant to happen. But you kind of sometimes you wish, like, you know, 15 years ago or something, if you knew things were like gonna work out this way, you could have relaxed a little bit. You know what I mean? You ever think that? Like, if I knew this was gonna happen, I wouldn't have been. You look back, you're like, I was worried about this or that, or it's just, or even like, I was saying with my eyes too, even like now, like and a lot of it is you lose sight of it, you know, and I always try to make sure I don't, but it's easy for anyone to lose sight of anything, no matter how much you try not to take things for granted. I always think like if I'm ever having a bad day or like every time I go to the eye doctor, like I was saying before, and just for a checkup and it's not like some emergency or surgery or anything like that, I just am like, you know what, like how could I be upset about anything? Because I think, you know, although it was such a, you know, it seems like your whole life when you're a kid and you have all these surgeries, and then before you know it, it's like 20-something years later, and you're like almost forget about it, you know, and you're like, wow, I can't lose sight of that and just be happy that, you know, if my vision and everything's stable, I'm like, I really can't be upset about anything, you know. That's kind of the mindset I try to keep, you know, in my head. So
I'll let you go first.
Yeah, was there ever like anything the doctors told you that you thought would affect how you wrestle or even how you grapple now?
Like, you mean like in terms of like not being able to do it?
Something like that. Like
I mean,
hinder, you know.
I mean, they, you know, when I first got in, well, it's funny because when I first started wrestling, I don't remember which eye it was now, but I was learning, you know, referee's position and everything. And I remember in practice, they were teaching us, like, I was getting in referee's position, and the guy on bottom, he put his head back because my coach was like, oh, on bottom, you always got to keep your head up. And I was like, you know, sloppy. I'm like hanging too high on his back. So he threw his head up and he hit me in the eye. So I was like, oh, whatever. Like nothing really happened at the moment. But then when I went home, all my vision was like real blurry in that one eye. So I'm like, oh, great. So the next day we went to the eye doctor. My mom's freaking out, you know. This is like, you know, middle school. So this is like after a history of all these surgeries. So, you know, anything with my eye is freaking like brings back. My mom's like, not this again, you know. Yeah. And so am I, you know. So we go to the eye doctor. And it turned out like I popped some blood vessel or something in my eye, which wasn't like it sounds worse than it is, but the reason my vision was real blurry was because the blood was like draining down like the front of your eyeball, basically. Not like you could really see it, but it was making that's why it was like, you know, it was like a snow globe, you know? So right off the bat, my doctor's already like, oh, Jesus Christ, this freaking wrestling, I don't know if this is a good idea. That's why in high school, like, this is another thing I didn't do in jiu-jitsu. Plus, I don't think it would really work out. It was barely worked out in wrestling, but it was the only way my doctor would let me wrestle. Was I used to wear like these like they were called like rec specs, you know those things, like people will wear them for, I mean, probably all kinds of shit.
Sport, like
tennis,
the goggles,
they're like goggles
right?
like for like, but they have like the band on the back,
Yeah, for sure.
for like protection and whatnot. So like, believe it or not, I wore that. And then in wrestling, obviously in matches you have to wear headgear, so the headgear would kind of like hold it in place too a little bit. But of course, in wrestling, people are pulling on your head and you're freaking ending up in this position, that position. So they were a pain in the ass. So that but I just had to stick with it. But in jiu-jitsu, I don't wear any protection, which it's funny. Too bad this podcast, if this was a week earlier, you guys would have, speaking of eye doctors and whatnot, I had a huge freaking, my right eye had a huge shiner.
Yeah,
I had that thing was huge. Yeah, I had like I was having a good round with this one kid. He's a real good stud wrestler, and he shot in, and I sprawled in my eyebrow here. It wasn't actually my eye, thank God. Nothing on my eye got even touched. Very close, but it was the bone right here, like where my eyebrow is, hit like the back of his head, and there wasn't bleeding or anything. So we just kept going, and then like a minute later, on accident, we were in kind of like a similar position, and I kneed him in the face on accident. So we had to stop because he was bleeding, and then as he was getting up because he was bleeding, he looks at me. He's like, "Oh my God!" He's like, "Your eye freaking swelled up." And then I kind of like, my hands are all sweaty. I didn't really, especially with my eye, I didn't want to really touch it. But I kind of just like put my hand like here, and I could already feel it. It was like a freaking baseball on my freaking eyelid. It was all like, it was all filled up with, swelled up. It was actually kind of gross at first, like how it felt. It was like squishy. But it looked cool.
I was gonna say, I gotta tell Tiz, because you sent
cool.
it to me. He sends me a snap, and I was like, "Geez, how'd that happen?" He tells me that story, and he was like, "I hope this never goes away."
Yeah,
dude.
yeah.
I was like, "That's crazy."
Oh, it was great. The only bad thing was I was like, "Damn!" It was like during the Christmas break off work, so like, people at jiu-jitsu could see it, but
you're taking like a Christmas card with your family, and
I know.
It's got like a big.
It was the day after Christmas it happened, so I was pissed. I'm like, "Damn! I wish this happened before the holidays. I could have had it for the holidays." And then also I wish it happened during school because I wanted to go back to work and scare the kids, and I thought maybe one of the teachers might think it was hot or something. So.
Yeah,
but
that'd be funny.
The swelling went down like after 2 days, and then it was just black and blue for like another week. But I think it's pretty much good now. But yeah, speaking of my eye doctor, good thing that went away before I went there. If I went there, if that happened like 2 weeks later, oh my God.
Yeah,
he would have been
like, "Stop."
He would have been like, "You've been
stop,
doing what?" Like, this is not conducive to your eye condition.
Yeah, doctors definitely.
Not
he's
a cool guy
doctors, but all those other doctors probably they don't like martial arts too much.
No.
I always say like when
probably
you watch MMA, like the doctor in the cage, like you'll have a guy's eyebrows hanging off, and you're like, "He's good to go."
Yeah,
like imagine like that dude just walks in like a normal doctor, like, "Dude, go to the emergency room." Like that's why I love MMA because it's so different than like any. And I know obviously we're talking about like grappling, but still like martial arts.
I agree.
As a whole. It's just so funny to think about things like that.
Oh yeah, those UFC doctors, they'll let something go that a normal, like you said, normal, they'd be like, "Oh my God, like you have to freaking go to the ER right now."
You wonder like what the difference is in like the rule set that they're going by versus a normal doctor. But
I know.
Tiz kind of mentioned something before that I kind of wanted to touch on, and like it was talking about how the doctor is talking about maybe you not being able to do certain things in wrestling or jiu-jitsu, but when you first started wrestling, like obviously now with your vision it's like you're just used to it, but back when you first started, was that something that would be in your head at the beginning of matches and stuff, or did you kind of like get comfortable right away?
I mean, honestly, I didn't really think about my vision really in terms of the matches. I'd be nervous just because of wrestling and the competing, but never really because of my vision, or I thought like it was going to be the reason that I wasn't going to win or something like that. So no, not really. I mean, honestly, I'm more mindful of it now in terms of like jiu-jitsu, just because I'm more like critical of my game, and like I realized, like you were saying before, how I said I'm not really comfortable unless I'm like making contact, or basically you said I'm uncomfortable when I'm at distance, which is true, and it's something I've been working on actually recently, because like I had like a match where I kind of like fucked the match up because like we were kind of at distance. Like I was winning the match, and the kid, he was kind of like not really wanting to like tie up a lot and like keeping his distance, which is like all right, which is fine. But I kind of like just let it get to me, and I got kind of like sloppy, and then he ended up taking me down at the end of the match, and I lost. So ever since then, I'm like, shit, I got to like stay comfortable and like stay disciplined even when I'm at distance, and don't reach or like rush in and like. And just, close the gap, in like a measured way. It's like striking almost, like you don't want to just run in. Same thing with wrestling. Like I don't want to like be uncomfortable and like be out of, that's basically what happened in the match. It wasn't even that I rushed in. I just like, we're at distance for so long and I got kind of like sloppy and uncomfortable. And then I kind of like stood up, like got out of a good stance. And then the kid like perfectly timed a double leg. And then he took me down. And then the match ended like 10 seconds after that.
Jeez.
So ever since then, it's definitely something I've been working on a lot. Just like hand fighting to close the distance and just circling and just the biggest thing, there's always technical stuff to work on, but the biggest thing is just like in my head being comfortable, in those and just recognizing when I'm in those positions to like not do anything stupid, and just keep working to get to the positions where I do feel more comfortable. So.
That is super interesting. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything, because I feel bad. Tiz has been sitting here most of the time. I was like, I'm not trying to like not let you ask any questions if you have anything on your mind, obviously.
No,
but.
yeah, I mean there was one thing as we were going late. Are there any grapplers in particular that you try to emulate?
I mean, honestly, people always talk to me like about jiu-jitsu, like guys at jiu-jitsu, they talk about like, the professional grapplers, and people are like surprised to hear, like, honestly, I don't really follow like professional grappling that much. Yeah. Like I follow loosely like through social media. Like I'm basically a casual like wrestling fan and like wrestling, not pro wrestling. I don't watch that at all, but like real wrestling, like college wrestling and stuff like that, and grappling. I basically just follow them like casually just through like Flow Wrestling and Flow Grappling, to be honest, on Instagram. But besides that, like, only thing I follow like to the T really is MMA, because to me MMA, I love wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and they're great, and all martial arts, any martial art is great, for so many reasons, it's just for me, obviously grappling was suited best for me, but MMA to me is the end all be all of martial art, of combat sports, any martial arts, so that's kind of how I always been. So honestly, I mean, if I think of grapplers, like, I don't know. I think of more MMA guys in terms of like want to emulate guys. I would look towards more MMA fighters, even though they're not just strictly grappling. But, guys who, of course you have like cliche guys you always want to be like Khabib or something, But I don't know. Honestly, I kind of just have my own game, honestly. Like, I don't really... it's good to watch guys and get some ideas, but to me, it's all about what feels right. And you could watch something a million times, but... Yeah. It's all like what's part of you got to be like honest with yourself with your game, and people who know me and like train with me, they know I have like a specific game, and they know like they can just tell like, oh yeah, that's something Sean would do, versus like, oh yeah, he would never do that, you know what I mean? So you kind of everyone's different, and that's what martial arts, like, that's the thing, you can roll with someone and never talk to them, and I've rolled with guys who don't even, Fox will bring his freaking boys from Czech Republic over, and I'll roll with these guys, they don't speak any English. And they're good, and we'll freaking go to war and still never say a word. I'll say something, but I don't think he knows what I say, and I don't know what he said, Yeah. And they're nice guys and all. It's nothing like hostile or anything. But we'll have these crazy rounds, and then you never see the guy ever again, and you barely ever talk to him. But, like, you can tell what a guy's like just from rolling with him and seeing how his game is, and it all, all those things. You can tell, you can feel it, and your game a lot of times resembles, like, your personality, too. People always say that. And I think that's true, so it's interesting.
You kind of, started this discussion kind of going into MMA, and I do want to say this before we get into this, but, like, I was telling you before the show, in a way, the Hurt Handbook wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for Sean getting me into MMA, like, in the first place. Like, that I was, like a casual, pretty much, because I got into it, like, in middle school, kind of like the John Jones-DC rivalry, for, like, those people who don't know, but then, like, until really like 2018, 2019, I was like really a casual fan, and then like we started talking about it, and then eventually like when we'd actually start hanging out, you showed me, I'll never forget this, it was Diaz versus Daly, and then like that was the first fight that I remember seeing. I was like, this classic, awesome. And then obviously from there I got really into it, and then Tiz by proxy gets into it, because that's when I started showing him fights, because pretty 100%. Much a little after that was UFC 236, and it was Izzy versus Gastelum. And I showed Tiz that fight at lunch, and he was like, "Dude, this is awesome."
It's not that hard to get people in the MMA if you just show them the right fight. Before you know it, they're like, "Oh, like it gets their attention."
You know our friend Jim. Yeah. Shout out to Jim, technical director of THH. We always say that, but
Jimbo, good guy.
The third fight that he ever saw, because we were in Washington D.C. in 2019 watching UFC 239, which was Jones versus Santos. So the third fight that he ever saw watching MMA was Askren Masvidal.
Oh yeah,
dude. Oh my god. Saw that. He saw Ben Askren get hit and go down and stay down. He was like, "Is he gonna be okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, dude, trust me, he's fine." Like, because you've seen it like enough times, and you're like, "Yeah, he's all right. He's just he'll get up."
That was a bad one, but
yeah.
I remember watching that one too.
But the main point, obviously, in bringing all that up is like, you were an MMA fan before me and Tiz were, and like I said, I almost thank you in a way, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be as into this stuff.
I'm glad I could help. I'm glad I could lead people to MMA.
Of course. It's a great thing to lead people to.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm happy I was a good influence.
Yeah, it's a great sport.
Yeah, I'm happy. The only reason I got into MMA really was, thank God, the Spike TV back in the day. Flipping through the channels, freaking on cable. This is before you even needed the cable box. This is like 2006 or 7. You just had the cable wire you put in the back of the TV. It's like before Optimum and all this shit, So you just flip through the channels, and I'd always check the usuals: 40, FX, 41, Comedy Central is 50, and 41, Spike TV. They would always play UFC, and I saw like the commercial or something for the Ultimate Fighter, or it was on or something. It was Matt Hughes versus Matt Sarah that season, I remember. And then like in between, if the Ultimate Fighter was on, all the commercials in between the show were like, a lot of them were for UFC, like pay-per-views and stuff. And then so I started watching that, and then UFC Unleashed, it was called, the show with Mike Goldberg. Yeah. And he would like talk about a fight, and then like he'd give you like the background. It helped a lot, so it helped me like kind of build the timeline from like what I missed before I got into MMA.
It's so crazy you say that, not to cut you off, because I swear to God, like those are on ESPN Plus too.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
that literally helped me get into MMA. Like I watched Rory Robbie too. Yeah. Robbie versus Johnny Hendricks, like fights like that were like just really while I was getting into it. Oh my god.
Oh yeah, man. Back then they had all the legendary, like Chuck versus Tito, like all these legendary fights they had on that show. So like I kind of like got educated, and then I just kept watching the Ultimate Fighter, but it was all on Spike TV back then. Spike TV was the freaking best back then.
Now it's Paramount. It's not the same.
I don't even know now. Like I said, the channels are probably all different now. Those are the good old days. I don't even have cable now, so.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You're not missing much.
Nah, I just stream everything. But exactly. That's how it all started. It's crazy, but and the UFC has come so far, and MMA as a whole, obviously. But
now you got us two jerk-offs covering it.
Yeah, right? People are covering it more.
You're probably thinking, like, watching us when we first started this, he's like, these guys, like, I got them into this shit.
Honestly,
and he's like, now they're talking about it.
I didn't even really think of it like that.
No, I know.
I remember when I would send you. I remember I sent you like a list of fights you should watch through Snapchat. Right. I would just like literally. I would like right off the bat. I could think of a million of them, and then like whenever I would just think of one would pop in my head because there's so many. I would just message it to Robbo like, all right, another fight, this guy versus this guy, whatever, and just like over time you watch, and then like after certain fights he'd message be like, damn, you were right about that one. That was a good one.
Just a bunch of crazy ones. Like,
there's so many good fights. Oh my god.
I mean, you know that we interviewed Rob Font on the channel at one point. One of my favorite fights that you told me to watch in the very beginning, and this was like right when I was getting into it, was Rob Font versus Ricky Simone. You remember that fight? Yeah. Oh my god, like just war.
Yeah. That was a war. Yeah.
There's so many fights that you could think of that are just like that in MMA, and like every MMA fan has like those wars that got them into the sport, which I think is so cool because. Especially now, like, really during, like, the pandemic, like, when the UFC was kind of, like, the first league to come back, a lot of people, like, were getting into MMA at that time.
Oh, yeah.
I always say this, it bothers the hell out of me because a lot of people, they don't know how good Tony Ferguson was before that because these people, they've been watching since 2020. Yeah. They've just seen Tony Ferguson lose. Exactly. That's, like, where they started with Tony. I'm like... Oh my god, they missed so much because like when I was getting into Tony, it was like when he was fighting Anthony Pettis, like
oh my god,
I forget the Kevin Lee fight, like that was like around when I was getting into MMA.
Yeah.
But oh my god,
I know what you mean. It's just I guess that could happen with any fighter though. Like some people like they could have said that back in the day like. If someone got into MMA a little after, like when Chuck was on his way out, Chuck Liddell,
BJ Penn, that's another person we talk about sometimes.
A lot of these guys, if you just saw those fights, you wouldn't even have any idea, the legacy they had. But
yeah, that's the nature of sports,
it's crazy.
I guess, in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's why guys got to do it like GSP and freaking
Jones, too.
John Jones, and freaking like. But I'm saying like GSP retired like on top. You know.
Oh,
I mean?
yeah,
Smart.
I thought you were gonna say like extended runs are like pretty impressive.
Well, I mean,
because they are.
Everyone should try to be like John Jones, but
Yeah.
in terms of fighting, but in terms of like guys who like
quitting while you're ahead.
Yeah, quit while you're ahead. Like, I don't know. And I get the mentality of these guys, obviously. These guys are warriors and they want to keep fighting. But
the fact that GSP, too,
as a fan,
after the Johnny Hendricks fight, was out for years and comes back at a different weight class and just beats the shit out of Michael Bisping, wins the title, dips
and
again.
Then just dips
like,
again,
you can imagine, like, because we talk about this all the time with the business of the UFC and, like, how they definitely don't like when people do that.
Oh, no.
And, like, GSP
they knew he was
going
to do that, I think. Because that's why they want him to, like, agree to a fight with Robert Whitaker or something like that.
Exactly.
I remember hearing something about that.
To get more into like modern MMA, because it's kind of like a similar situation that we're in now with Tom Aspinall as the interim champion.
Yeah.
Do you think that
He's
John
really
Jones
good.
will ever fight him?
I mean, of course, if they have the fight, I want to see it, but I don't think so. I don't think he will, and I don't know. Honestly, I kind of agree with what Dana White was saying about John Jones just fighting Stipe. Hopefully that fight. I was so pissed that fight fell through. You know, man. I was looking forward to that. That was literally the fight I was looking forward to the most, probably the whole year. But it's all right. It'll just the suspense builds. It's better off.
It'll happen.
Yeah, it'll happen definitely. But I don't know. I mean, John Jones, he's literally went through like at least two generations of like fighters, basically. You know, it's like he's going on like the third generation kind of now. At least, I don't even know how to really measure that, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no,
with, like guys
sure.
like Tom Aspinall and like even like Pavlovich,
These are all like I was talking about that pandemic era. Like these are all guys that came 2019, 2020, and like when I was getting into the sport, it was like after John Jones was like beating like Gustafsson, Glover Sharon, like even before that, like Rashad Evans, Machida, all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just so crazy to think about, and the fact that he's still here, and like I know that he's fairly inactive, but you said, I kind of agree with Dana in the sense that like he's kind of earned that, right?
Yeah.
I love Aspinall. I know me and you have been high on him for a long time, but like we want to see him get the title shot, but I understand why that fight needs to happen because it's just a legacy thing. But
100%.
I kind of just hope it happens sooner rather than later, just because no matter who's champion, I want to see Aspinall get that title shot because he earned it, man.
Oh, 100%.
I know
I was watching that fight the other day when he fought Pavlovich. That was crazy.
And he took that on short notice and did it like that.
Pavlovich
is another...
He's scary, guy. I mean, they both are, but that guy, like, Russian dude, he looks like a freaking dude out of a movie. Like, you could tell that dude's a Russian just by looking at him. He just looks... He has the Russian... He's got, like, the fedor, like, Russian dad bod.
Yeah, and that just, like... Just
big dude.
That cold expression.
Yeah, that cold look on his face. That's what it is. And he's just coming with those freaking... big freaking like ham hocks as his hand. His power is crazy, and like just the way he throws, like I don't know, something about that guy. You just could tell. Yeah, just like you could just tell, even if you didn't train, you could just tell like you did not want to get hit by that guy.
And then Aspinall.
So to see Aspinall do that to him, especially that early. If I heard like if someone said, "Oh, the fight is going to be a first round knockout," I would have thought that meant Pavlovich won personally. Not that Aspinall can't knock people out, obviously, but I don't know. That would just be my instinct.
Yeah, I get that, though. Makes sense.
Aspinall's
like more of a finesse guy.
Yeah. Like, I would have thought, oh, first round, Pavlovich just came out and just smashed him. But
I'd love watching Tom Aspinall, though, man, because he's so well-rounded. Like, a lot of the people, they don't realize how good his ground game is because he finishes a lot of these fights.
Well, his dad is some big... like jiu-jitsu
in England
or something. Yeah, in England.
He was like one of the first big jiu-jitsu guys in England. Yeah, you're right
he's
about
like a
that.
pioneer or something.
It's crazy because like everybody was sleeping on his ground game, and then I think this might have been recent enough where we covered it on the podcast. It was when he fought Volkov, and everybody was like, well, I don't know if he's gonna beat this guy. Like no one was really like me and Tez really were early on his bandwagon, man.
Yeah, that's good
because. I mean, I knew that stuff about his dad too, so I'm like, this dude's not exactly
he knows some jiu-jitsu.
Exactly,
there's no way he's just a chump on the ground.
I mean, the other thing you think of too is like a lot of those guys from like the UK, especially in the old school UFC, not as much anymore, but like old school UFC, they kind of had like a bad rap when it came to grappling because it was more like boxing and kickboxing over there.
Yeah,
but, like,
definitely.
I feel like a lot of that kind of bled into the beginning of Aspinall's career, and they're like, I don't know if he's really a good grappler, and then he just ran through Volkov, and we were like, yeah, that's how good this dude is.
Yeah.
Like, because Volkov, a lot of people sleep on him too, because he's kind of like, bit of like a gatekeeper in the division at this point, but he's
Right.
got skills. Like if
Oh, 100%.
it's crazy to think of like some of the guys that he's beaten. I mean, I know we started the conversation talking about Jones Stipe, but I mean, I've been big on that. Like, I want
yeah.
to see Aspinall get that shot at some point,
100%.
whether it be against Jones or not. I would love to see him fight John Jones. I hope that it does happen, but I don't know. I kind of agree
Yeah,
with
of
you.
course I want to see. I mean, I want to see like pick any fight. Like I could just pick names out of the hat. Like I want to see everything. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's probably not gonna happen. But
One of the, yeah, for sure, Tez.
Is there a moment that you can remember in your time watching that when it happened, like you kind of just knew a sort of change was coming in MMA for like years to come?
I mean, the evolution kind of over time. Like before you know it, like I start watching it, and you have guys like Chris Lieben are still fighting. Like I remember when he fought Anderson Silva, and Vanderlei Silva. Remember he knocked him out.
That was one of the fights that was on your list.
He did fight Anderson Silva too.
That was a lot quicker.
Yeah. It didn't go. Yeah, different outcomes.
Yeah,
but,
he kind of just got.
But both of those fights. But I meant
good.
the Vanderlei Silva. I remember like you see stuff like that, and not to. I mean, Chris Lieben. And it's like everyone knows this. Like a lot of the old school UFC guys are like quote unquote like tougher, like than the guys nowadays, which I wouldn't say they were, but you know what I mean. Like they were more like had that mentality. It was like tough guys, but like skilled too, But if you go even further back, of course, like Tank Abbott is the perfect example of that.
Brian's gonna love
GOAT.
you for bringing Tank up.
Of course, how
Every
can we
time-
not?
Every time you bring Tank Abbott up, I always send the link to Brian. I'm like,
he
check it
loves-
out, dude.
He loved it. I remember we used to watch it. We would just go on Fight Pass and watch Tank Abbott fights.
I was
and
gonna
Brian
bring this fight
loved
out.
it.
Do you remember it was in Pride, Don Fry versus that Japanese guy with the
100%.
blonde hair where they're just
Oh my
swinging at the
God.
right hand?
Everyone
Dude,
knows-
They're in a collar tie,
Yeah, literally.
straight punching
It's like
each
they
other
agreed
over and
to.
over.
It was like they agreed to that before the fight. It's like,
Oh
all right,
my
we're just
God.
gonna settle this like men.
It's so
First
funny.
guy to just fall from blows to the head.
I say this to Tiz all the
But-
time. Like when we're talking about MMA week by week, it's kind of tough to go back and watch those old fights
Yeah.
like I used to.
Yeah.
And like so when I'm sitting here thinking about them, like it's hilarious. And we don't even talk about them that much on here unless they kind of come up.
Yeah.
But if
I know.
If anyone hasn't seen that fight, Don Fry, I gotta look up the name and put it in the description.
Yeah. What was it?
I might have Tapology open. I'll look it up now. But it's Don Fry
That
in
was
Pride, dude.
But-
that was in a ring. That's in a ring too, right?
Yeah, Pride
I
is
mean-
just different, man.
Honestly, as guys, like I don't know. It's interesting because I'm trying to think like when you always had guys like GSP who were kind of ahead of his time. Like back then he was like a real martial artist and like.
Takayama.
Oh yeah, Takayama.
Takayama.
Oh yeah, if you haven't seen Don Fry versus Takayama, forget it. You gotta
Great
see that.
fight.
Yeah.
Great fight. But oh my god.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of like a fight, I think it's kind of interesting. It's a good question, honestly, because I don't know. It's kind of like before you knew it, especially like watching it from 2006 or 7. Before you know it, like the sport had changed, and like even by like 2016, it was totally different. Let alone now, even 8 years after that. But so I don't know. It's just when you think about like guys like GSP were like ahead of his time, or maybe even like Anderson Silva, like all these greats. I think it was just because they were such outliers in that time period of fighting. Not that they wouldn't be good now, but now it's like some of the guys who were great back then, you're like, they would get killed by a lot of the guys now who aren't even champions per se. Just because the level has come up so much and
In
people
such a short amount of time, too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think MMA had a big jump probably somewhere in like, I don't know, like 2010 or like 2013 in there. Like that was when it really, because like before that, it was still not as like.
Would you say
I don't know,
when
like
Strike Force ended?
That was probably when it really
that
became like
that
UFC
definitely
or bust.
helped. Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, that definitely helped. That is a good point because all those guys that throw those into the roster with the UFC already, that adds a lot of new talent and like different looks, and stuff you haven't seen before,
And that whole like champion versus champion type talk that
Yeah.
we're kind of getting now with in a different way because obviously it's at a lesser version, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
PFL and Bellator now coming together, like they're gonna do that champion versus champion card.
Oh yeah.
Like the UFC, like when they bought Strikeforce, I know that like the big thing was GSP versus Nick Diaz, and then like when the WEC came in, Uriah Faber versus Dominic Cruz, like all these things. Like, do you look back on it and do you miss those eras, or do you kind of like it better now that like it's all under the UFC banner?
Of course, you always have that like nostalgia to, you know, when you watch like old fights, because, you know, you think back when you're watching it like at a young age. So you always have that, you know, people always, you know, want to go back to how things were when they were a kid. You know, everyone always says, oh, like it was so much better back in there. But I mean, in some regards, you know, like and just like the vibe, you know, the vibe of some of the old school UFC, you know, you don't really get that with the new one. You know, it has a different vibe now, and it's good. You know, I love UFC, and obviously I'd rather have it be the way it is now than then, just because, you know, it's higher level. There's more fights, there's more fighters, they're better. The fights are better. You know, there's more like characters too now. You know, and personality wise, and it's just different. But the old school UFC will always, you know, have a special spot because it was a little grittier, you know, like you could just tell, even like in the production and
Very
everything.
like metal.
Yeah, and like
Face the Pain.
Yeah, yeah, Face the Pain. And like,
oh my god,
and like the tail of the tape. Everyone freaking like, oh, if you hear that now and you're an old school UFC fan, it's always gonna trigger something, you know.
They need to bring that back.
They do.
Even if they don't bring Face the Pain back,
yeah,
bring that back.
Yeah,
that's
I know.
The best. It's like Gladiators.
Yeah, literally,
dude. I miss it.
It was such a glorious tune, like before a fight like that, you know. It was great. But yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy to see it, and I'm happy. It's kind of crazy because, like, you know, growing up, every sport, you always hear about the golden era of sports, but I'm like, wow, I kind of like watched MMA. You know, obviously I missed a lot too, but, you know, I was alive. At least, like, MMA kind of was born, like, at least in like basically like 1993 seems to be the year, which was the year I was born. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then like, I wish I started watching earlier, you know, but it just kind of happened that way. But I'm like, well, in hindsight now, I'm like, I didn't miss too much, and I filled in a lot of the gaps thanks to UFC Fight Pass. You know, you go back and watch fights you didn't see. But, you know, now I've been watching UFC for, you know, 16, 17 years, you know, so it's crazy to see it, and it's good to, and it's cool. It's like something I can talk, because, like, you know, I talk to guys, you know, and a lot of them are, you know, guys, a lot of the guys I talk about MMA are my age or a lot younger. And even guys my age didn't get into watching it as young as I did, you know, so a lot of guys I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember this fight, that fight, and they're like, oh man, like, to them that's like freaking talking about Hoist Gracie, you know what I mean? So, you know, it's all relative to your age and whatnot, but
for sure,
it's a good thing. I'm just happy. I love MMA so much, and I'm happy I have been watching it for that long. It gives you a little more credibility when you talk about it, you know what I mean, in terms of like old fights and.
That's why when you sent me that list back in the day, I went and watched all those fights. I'm like, I can't be caught being a casual.
No casuals.
I'm thinking back to the Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner fight. Like,
oh,
diehard fans at that time probably watching that
my
fight.
God.
Just like,
I wish I got into it then, you know. Yeah. But
that was like a big boom, I think, when that was like basically what saved the UFC.
100%,
I mean, a lot of people don't know that. We've talked about that like a little bit on the podcast, but like I said, for the most part, it seems like a lot of MMA fans now, they've kind of come lately with the ESPN era, and like maybe some are from Fox like me, but Tiz raised his hand. Yeah, that's true. At least, but the good thing about you, Tiz, is like you dove in head first like I did, and like I was like, you should watch this fight.
And
I basically did what you did to me.
I think generally, like, I'm someone that's like, you know, takes an interest to the history and things and how things, like, you know, what the roots are and all of that, especially with this. So
I mean, I always say this, the Hurt Handbook existed off camera long before sitting in your old apartment watching fights, just bullshit.
I know, right?
The cards.
Yeah.
Sitting there from the first early.
It's too bad we couldn't have done an episode in the Butler Ridge.
Oh my God, that would have been a classic.
It would have been kind of fitting, but.
Back in the Ridge, definitely.
That's
where the Hurt Handbook truly
probably would have
began.
sounded pretty good too with how spacey it is.
True.
Cool.
Oh my God, all the times in the Ridge.
We would have had some nice MMA podcasts back then.
So many fights watched in the Ridge.
Sorry guys for that little cut. The camera died. That's just what happens when you're reminiscing about the Ridge and talking fights. I mean,
oh my God.
Like I said, we had so many podcasts that were unrecorded at Butler Ridge. This is pretty much turning into one of those.
Yeah, basically.
Talking about MMA, man. But before we let you go here, we were talking about this a bit before the podcast even started, and a little in that like span where I was getting the new camera battery. But fights in 2024 that are coming up, which ones are the most exciting to you? Because
I mean, the ones that are announced at least right now. I mean, there's obviously, you know, the next three like main events for the pay-per-views are all good. Obviously, Strickland versus Duplessis. That's a good fight. The co-main on that card is kind of a sleeper, a snoozer. I mean, kind of a yeah,
it's
like the
the
of
Pennington,
course, yeah,
Bueno
Pennington,
Silva, right?
yeah. But anyway, what is February? Is that Volk and Taporia?
Yeah.
And then March is O'Malley and Cheeto, right?
Yes, sir.
Those are all great fights, but
Then UFC 300.
yeah, that's the biggest thing. Yeah, that's the biggest thing, honestly. Like, not that I'm looking past those, but of course, like UFC 300 is like, this like light at the top of the mountain that everyone's looking towards, and especially, it's like there has been a few fights announced, but the main event and some of the bigger fights, everyone's still speculating, and you're hearing all these rumors like Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. You guys heard that?
I actually haven't heard that.
I heard that. Fight. Or what the hell is the other fight I heard? Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad.
Yeah,
which that's a good fight.
Too, like,
but I'm like, I feel like they want something juicier though for the UFC 300. Like,
I think it would
know.
make sense to have, and we were talking about this on the last episode that we did, but like Bilal and Leon, for some reason, like, well, I guess I kind of get it in a way, but like for some reason they just don't want Bilal fighting for the title, it seems. But I think he just has to get it.
Yeah,
next.
yeah.
Like, the only person who has a longer
point.
unbeaten streak is Leon.
Yeah, yeah.
And they have history, so like
Yeah.
it's not like you can't sell it if you like
Yeah.
quote unquote don't like Bilal. But at the same time, like I feel like they want to put it on 300 because they want to get like a bigger fight as the main event, and then that way they don't have to rely on Leon and Bilal to sell it.
If they
That's
make
what I
it like
think.
the co-main, that would be a good move. But the main event, they definitely don't want it to be that fight for UFC 3.
Yeah,
And I don't either.
Think so either. Yeah,
I want
hope
something
not.
crazy. I want Brock Lesnar to come back versus freaking
I wish.
Henry Cejudo or something. We need something.
Dude, like we were saying,
they need
this,
to pull a rabbit out of the hat or something. I don't know what
that's
they're
what
going
I'm
to
saying.
do.
Like, what do you think about that?
Because think about it. I was talking about this the other night. I kind of did the math little in my head. I'm like, well, John Jones. Like, think of all the superstars. Like John Jones. All right, he's not fighting because he's injured.
Yep.
Adesanya, I mean, he potentially could be, but he
Not
said he
gonna be a main
wasn't.
event either.
He wasn't going to be fighting till unless they like who are they
Give him
going
a title shot against
Yeah,
somebody.
because that was another rumor I heard. They could have Adesanya come back and fight either like Pereira at light heavyweight,
it's like,
or maybe even like Strickland or Duplessis if they're willing to fight.
I was saying
in April.
Our prediction, and like this is news has come out since this prediction, so I think some of them are kind of like a little dated, but our prediction was McGregor Chandler, which obviously might happen in June.
That's
now.
what I was
It's
thinking
not
too,
confirmed,
but I don't think they can do that by April, right?
I don't know. I think they can if they want.
The UFC can do whatever the fuck they want.
Well, because at that point,
to make it happen, but
even if you care about the USADA stuff, like it'll be 6 months by the time April comes. I know USADA's gone now; that's 2024. But either way, like even if they were around, he'd be eligible.
I mean, I'm sure if Conor really wanted to fight on UFC 300, the UFC would figure out a way to make it happen.
Well, like let me ask you this, because like to me, it's just almost like a no-brainer. Like because if you don't have him. You joked about Brock Lesnar, but Brock Lesnar's not coming back. Nah. And you think of the other rabbits that they could pull out of their hat, right?
Yeah.
GSP is not. I don't think he's coming back. He said
a
million times he'll never fight over the age of 40.
Khabib
Even him,
like
I just don't see it. Ronda Rousey, I don't see it.
That was the other thing. People are like, wait, Ronda Rousey comes back.
That's what I'm saying. They just made that up out of like thin air.
I don't know.
But to me, it's like if you don't have Conor, people are like saying like, oh, this is gonna be such a mega event, but like. Who can you really put in if it's not him?
Nate Diaz.
Exactly. That's the only other person.
Diaz versus Conor 3.
Oh,
are they ever going to make that fight? Like,
I think it's going to be I think they're going to kind of time Diaz out. They're going to try and get it when like Diaz is 40.
40 years old, non-coherent.
Honestly, dude, like I don't know. I still think McGregor Chandler's the fight, but it is. I don't know. It's weird to me that the UFC hasn't confirmed that yet, but I still do think that it's probably going to be June International Fight Week because I don't know if you saw this, but like. Ariel Helwani like confirmed too that they are having like their International Fight Week card that week that Conor McGregor said. So like,
oh really?
But they wouldn't confirm, but they wouldn't deny.
Yeah, of
course.
course.
They didn't confirm that Conor McGregor would be headlining that event, which makes you think he probably is. They just couldn't say it. But
yeah, I don't know. It's really, it's really interesting to see what they're gonna do with UFC 300 because. Because like, what are they gonna like? Sean O'Malley is another guy they might, but he's fighting the month before that.
Yeah, makes sense. And even if you wanted to have him, that's not like a huge,
not big
to
enough
the Conor
for
level.
maybe like on the undercard, but
yeah,
like a main event for UFC 300 has to literally have like Conor in it or John Jones or freaking I know hypothetically Brock Lesnar or something like that. Like But
And when
all
you
these
think of the
guys,
realistic
like, yeah, like
options.
that's what I'm saying. When you really do the math in your head, you're like, it kind of narrows it down. Like, the only guy maybe is like Conor, maybe out of all the superstars that maybe it could be, right?
The way that I see it is
I don't know.
I think fans should temper their expectations on the main event, but not the card itself. I think the card is going to be stacked.
Well, they have a lot of
Like
the undercard will probably be ridiculous.
I mean, if you think about those 3 fights they announced, if let's say just because Dana's saying that this is going to be one of the most stacked cards they've ever had.
That's what he keeps saying. Yeah.
I would think that if this is the most stacked card that they're ever going to produce, that those 3 fights are going to be on the prelims, which is crazy to think. about.
Yeah. Well,
but they're all main card caliber fights.
Yeah.
It's
well, he said like the prelims of UFC 300 will be guys who don't even belong on the prelims.
Exactly.
That's what he was saying. So
and those fights
see.
are all nuts. So you wonder what they would have for the main card. And like I was thinking, you were talking about Adesanya. I was thinking that they could have like a 3-rounder with Adesanya and Hamzat.
Oh,
That'd
yeah,
be
yeah.
crazy. At 185,
they could.
title eliminator.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And
they're gonna pull some the UFC, and there's something they're gonna. And I just have a feeling, and I hope this does happen because it just the UFC never ceases to amaze me. Not to like kiss their ass, but I'm just being honest. I love the UFC, but like we're thinking about all these different options. Good, this guy versus this guy, this guy. What it ends up being will probably be something we never even thought of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like
true.
I don't know. Like I just have this feeling like they're gonna like. They're like working crazy, like UFC and Dana. They're not gonna fuck up UFC 300.
No, especially after 200 got so screwed up with like the whole John Jones thing at the last minute,
true.
and then Brock testing positive.
Yeah,
and all, like 900
it's kind of a shit show.
Yeah, but this is another theory that I have for UFC 300, and this will be like really the last thing before we go. But tell me what you think of this, right? So, and I'll tell you my evidence too. I think that we're going to get a champ versus champ, but in women's MMA, I think it's going to be Grasso versus Zhang. And I'd say that because the only contender at strawweight that I could think of who should get a title shot is Tatiana Suarez.
Yeah.
She's fighting at UFC 298.
Oh,
and then at flyweight, you have Erin Blanchfield versus Fiorot. Those are the only 2 contenders. I don't see them giving Valentina a 3rd shot right away like that. Because
I should know this. When's Erin's fight?
Like 2 weeks before that.
Oh,
That's why I'm like, well, you're not going to put a title shot at flyweight. So it's like both champions don't have a clear opponent.
Yeah.
The timeline makes sense. That would be a cool fight. Round 3 of the podcast. We stopped recording one more time. Sean had to go to the bathroom real quick. This is turning into Joe Rogan.
Like Joe Rogan style.
Yeah, exactly. The cuts for the piss breaks.
When you start talking MMA, it starts getting lengthy.
Exactly.
So.
It never stops. It's always fun to do, man.
Yeah.
But
I know.
We talked a lot about UFC 300 right before that little cut there, and I don't know, man. Like, of all the fights, is there a fight that like you would want to see as the main event of that? And like, I guess keep it like fairly realistic. Like,
like in a perfect world.
Because I was like, obviously, we'd love to see something like honestly, Brock versus DC. Or
I'd be all right with if it was John Jones versus Stipe, just because I had I had such an appetite for that fight for so long, and then for like what was it, 2 weeks before it got canceled.
Yeah, I think
so. You kind of get your hopes up, and then it gets pulled away, and you're like, So if they were able to do that fight at UFC 300, I think that's a worthy UFC 300 main event, personally. But that or Conor versus Chandler, that'd be great.
What do you think of, like, this will, like, really be the last thing we talk about, but it's just, you can't really, like, talk about Conor without bringing this stuff up. What do you think of, like, the social media stuff? Like, him drinking the wine and, like, being the villain all the time? Like, what do you think of, like, the heel turn that he's kind of at?
I mean, I don't know.
It kind of suits him in a way.
It does suit him, honestly. He plays it pretty well, and it sounds good when he does it. He's good at sounding, like, evil.
Better than Colby. And, like,
yeah.
Colby's trying.
It seems
real
more
hard.
real. Yeah, it does seem more believable and real, and... I think, he sounds a little crazy in some of them, honestly.
There's the one he posted. You see the one where he was in, like, the tuxedo and he's, like, doing the James... He's like, name's Bond.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I saw that.
Like, it's crazy.
I'm like, I don't know how much of this is influenced by, substances that he's ingesting, but either way.
USADA approved.
Yeah, I don't think it's USADA approved, but...
yeah, who knows?
Either way, he's
enjoying life.
Definitely on one.
That's for sure. He's enjoying life.
Yeah,
we'll
100%.
keep it at that.
Shit, he's balling, so...
Yeah. Hey, I mean, all the power. I always say this, all the power to him. Like, I hate
when
when people
blame the guy. Yeah,
exactly.
At the end of the day, I mean,
when people shit on him for being successful, I'm like, what are you talking about?
Obviously, he's done and said some stupid things, but at the end of the day, like, he put himself in the position he's in now, you know. So you can't really talk shit, really, you know. It's
exactly.
Like,
he's sitting on a yacht that he bought with like the money that he got from all these crazy fights.
And like it's such like a gangster way to get like obviously like so much of his money now is from other avenues not related to MMA, business, but MMA is obviously he had to do all that to get his name value, and that's how he really started out. And obviously, he made a shit ton of money from MMA too. And I'm sure he will continue to if who knows, he might never even fight again, you never know with Conor. I hope not, but
until
I'm
UFC
sure he will.
I'm
sure he's got at least maybe one more fight, but it's he is a self-made guy, and to make it up through MMA and just win it. And when you really go back and watch some of his fights, he's had so many great fights, and the run he had, I always kind of wish Conor stayed at featherweight, because there was other fights. He was dodging Frankie Edgar, was lurking.
Oh my God.
Joey Diaz called it. And all of a sudden, he fought Dustin, or frickin'
Dennis Seaver. Dennis Seaver
at him, and Frankie Edgar was lurking. Oh my God. There's a lot of fights he could have had at featherweight because he was undefeated at featherweight.
Remember, Joey Diaz is calling for that Khabib fight.
Oh my God!
Anybody's like, why don't he fight that fucking Khabib?
His next fight is against that Khabib. End of story. They're gonna do that's how it came up because he said Joey was saying he's gonna dodge Khabib. He's gonna do like what they did when Frankie Edgar was lurking. He's like, they're gonna hope Khabib or Tony they have a plane accident or a car crash, So
that was like for me, and maybe like I said, you said in the beginning, like you really want things to kind of like stay the same as it was when you're like just getting into it, or like when you were a kid. Like me, right when I was getting into the UFC, is like kind of like at that point, like when I was at the hardcore.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Tyron was the champion, Conor was fighting Khabib, and like, oh my God, dude, those were the times. I miss the tail end of like the UFC on Fox era. I always tell people,
even that's a little nostalgic to me.
UFC on Fox is my favorite. Yeah. That's me personally, and like I said, it might just be because that's when I was like starting to get really
that's what I'm saying.
It.
Like you have Fox, I had Spike TV.
Yeah,
you're always going to be a little biased.
Tiz, what do you think? Do you think ESPN is the best? Tiz probably hates it. Me and Tiz shit on ESPN sometimes because like some of those Apex cards are kind of like dull, but they're starting to get a little better now.
For the record, though, the worst card ever still in UFC history was Jessica I versus Cynthia Calvillo.
Another fight watched at the Ridge.
We watched that at the Ridge. I was sleeping the whole time.
Dude, that was so funny. That card had like, I honestly looking back, like Marvin Vittori was on it. He's good, but like besides him, man, I can't think of another fight on that card. It was so bad.
I just remember being so non-enthusiastic. Not excited.
Yeah, no title stakes. Like
nothing.
Jessica I, like I think lost a couple. And like I remember Cynthia Calvillo just came up to 125.
Yeah, that was it. That was like her big jump up to one. God, no one even cares. But
that was so funny. I can't believe we actually
still watched
got to
it
that.
though. Well, I was present. I was sleeping for like half of it, but I was still there. I had enough to turn it on.
Honestly, that was that was definitely one of the worst. Might be the worst one I've ever watched, just in terms of how.
I just had to.
Had to throw it out there.
We always talked about that. I had to throw that out there.
But hey, man, they're not all terrible.
But you can't blame them. It's like when they have fights this often, some of the cards are obviously going to be watered down. Like I like honestly like the old school. Speaking of like when I first got into it, back then it was like one pay-per-view, like not even a month. I don't think. I forget how many they had throughout the year. It wasn't like one a month. No, it definitely wasn't.
It's like one every.
It was like one every couple. Yeah, it was. They might have had like 4 a year or something. Whatever. So it was totally different. So like that's why like all those other things like that I would just like watch. Like I said, the Ultimate Fighter was huge because I'm like, oh, finally like some UFC,
Yeah.
But like the pay-per-views when I was a kid, I used to just watch them on like freaking random websites on like I'd Google the fight like the next day, like Sunday morning. I never would get the pay-per-views or anything, when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, my theory.
I would just watch them on whatever some sketchy website the next day.
For me, it's always been like now that they're on ESPN, it's the worldwide leader. Like, I feel like they can relax a little bit with the promotions, which is like promotional side of it, which is why there's not a huge pay-per-view star like Conor McGregor anymore because like the machine's gonna keep running no matter what with ESPN behind it.
Oh yeah.
And like even when they were on Fox, they still had those pay-per-view stars like McGregor, Rousey, Anderson Silva still at that point really, and
true.
like I don't know. I think that that's really been the biggest thing that's hindered them, and I think that they're starting to see that now with UFC 300 because it's like, oh, if we don't get Conor or Nate, like, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't know. That's my
I
theory.
like the cards though on the regular though, like how I'm like I've gotten used to it now that I'm like, you know, we're all spoiled, you know. But
exactly.
having that constant like new fights almost every week, or a lot of times it's like for weeks on end. It really is. It's great. So
yeah, for sure. And you know, to end it on this, you know, next week, first fights 2024 in the UFC main event at the Apex. We got Johnny Walker versus Magomed Ankalaev 2. After that,
I love
contest.
the UFC. I love how the UFC and MMA in general. And I know this is like overstated, but like boxing doesn't do stuff like this. Like boxing, not like I'm some hardcore boxing fan, but like they won't give you as much of the fights that the fans really want to see. There's a lot more bullshit. Like the UFC, like this fight was a good fight to begin with, and then it had the controversial stoppage in Abu Dhabi, and right away they like set it back up to UFC. Like they freaking only a couple months went by.
I love it.
So I love how they like do that. You know, I love how they listen to the fans and they know like, all right, we need to make it happen like ASAP. They don't have all this bullshit and they drag it out and the guys freaking want this and they want that. They just make it happen. I mean, I'm sure that goes on too behind closed doors, obviously, but it doesn't seem to be the same.
Now, if Johnny Walker gets kneed illegally, he's going to be like, we're in the UFC Apex in Las Vegas, Nevada, area code, whatever.
Yeah,
right.
He's gonna
the zip code is this.
Street address.
Because technically they're in the desert again.
Yeah.
he's like, gotta learn.
Stop putting this guy in the desert.
Yeah, we need to put him like at like Madison Square Garden.
Vancouver or something. If he says it then you could stop the fight.
Yeah, that would definitely make more sense.
Yeah.
But either way, for the people watching, this has obviously been a much longer pod than usual. If you made it this far, which we hope you did.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Yeah, honestly.
You're a hardcore then.
Exactly. Because this has been a real fun one.
We don't want casuals watching anyway.
Hell no.
Hardcore,
Looking back on MMA though, like just talking about those old fights, like I said before, me and Tiz don't really get as much of a chance to do that anymore. So I will say this before we go, it was fun to talk about old MMA like we did back in the day at the Ridge.
Oh yeah.
But it was also fun like just to talk about your story because, you know, we don't say this enough because we talk to you all the time, but it's like, it is impressive what you do. Like, and I know you're humble about it, but you're going to have to take the compliment in this case.
No, thanks.
Like to do like what you
it.
do and like the fact that you know, you compete at such a high level and you're beating guys who are like brown belts and black belts in these competitions and like the expert divisions and stuff. Yeah. It's incredible, man. And we hope that the people watching like got something out of your story because it is truly like inspirational when you think about it, just how crazy it is. But
thanks.
Overall, man, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
So we'll see y'all next week.
See you later, guys. Dash up in a foreign car. It's the type of shit that you be doing when